be back in just a little bit, but let's pass to Emmy.
Hey guys, I'm Emmy. I took APUSH last year and I'm currently a senior. I go to Lower Merion High School. I don't know if anyone knows where that is, but it's in like right outside of Philadelphia. So if you're from Philly, hello. I actually can't see the slideshow, but I'm assuming we're on that blue slide that says periods 1 through 3.
No, we're on the opening
And
slide.
We're on the intro slide still, but we can move it.
oh, okay. Well, welcome to Fiveable Crams. This is AP US History, and tonight we're going to be going over periods 1 through 3, and we're also going to be going over some other skills that you might need to know for the exam. If you're here, we're all here to help you in the chat. We have like some wonderful hosts who will answer your questions, who will give you some motivational support, and maybe just make some jokes along the way. I also still can't see the screen, but okay. If you want to follow us on social media, we have a TikTok, we have an Instagram, we have a YouTube. If you're into LinkedIn, you can also add us there. And then, like I said before, tonight we're just going over periods 1 through 3. I'm Emmy. It's nice to meet you guys.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm one of the other student cram hosts. And the agenda for today is we're in obviously the welcome, which we're in right now. Then we're going to go over periods 1 and 2 and do a little practice quiz on that. An SAQ based off of periods 1 and 2. A quick Q&A for any other questions that you guys might have revolving around those periods. Then we're going to move right into period 3. Do a practice quiz on that, review the content, do a skills practice on a period 3 FRQ, and then a Q&A to close it all up. So that's today's agenda. So
sorry, if you guys have questions throughout, you can put them in the Q&A tab, but then we're going to have like specialty time to talk about what we just covered. So at any time you can ask us questions and we'll get back to you.
Here we have how to make the most of a cram finale. So try to take some notes. I know there's like a sheet that you can use to keep along. Write down what's best for you. I mean, you don't have to write everything down on the slides or everything that we're saying, but write down what you think is best for you, whatever best way you study. And everything that we are talking about right now, any of these slides, any of this video itself can all be found in the Cram Hub, and it's all for you to use at your own time. You don't only need to listen to us now. I mean, you can take this on tomorrow or in the other span of the 5 days you have till the exam. Like I said, there's also a group chat, so you can share tips and tricks all in that chat. A lot of people use it. There's also going to be other hosts answering any questions you guys might have. And like Andrea just said, there's also the Q&A tab. Please use that for questions so we can see your questions more clearly and be able to answer them. And yes, we will take breaks. You will not be sitting here for 3 hours straight listening to drone on about APUSH. And yes, the replay will be available immediately after the event for you to rewatch however you want to. So as a community, we want you to be supportive. We want to lift each other up. I mean, we're all stressed here. We all have our own, you guys have your own AP test to take. So do most of us. We want to uplift each other, be supportive, but also be patient. We have 5 nights together. There will most likely be tech issues. There always is. So also be kind. We are real people. We did work hard on this. So. Lastly, you can win $100 by sharing your own cram experience and pay for the AP exam. So post about your cram finale experience on TikTok or Instagram and use the hashtag #5ablecrams and tag @thinkfiveable in the post or in the caption. And make sure your account is public for us to view. And as long as we laugh, you can win $100. So this is the beginning. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
Okay, I will take it away from here. So period 1 is the first unit in the APUSH curriculum. We start in 1491, and that's a special year because it's 1 year before Europeans arrived in the Americas. So it really encompasses all of the time before, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, these Native American societies. and how they were before Europeans came. It goes up to 1607, an important date in United States history, as the first British North American colonies were founded. It is important to know, and we'll go over this for each period, but period 1 is only 5% of the whole AP exam. So at most, you're going to have a short answer question. You'll probably see a multiple choice set on this material. So again, you don't have to, remember so much. I'm going to go over the specific things that come up on period 1, the way that you're going to see it on the exam. So we want to really just focus on the essentials here. Zoe, you can go to the next slide. So Native American societies, the peopling of the Americas really started tens of thousands of years ago. The debate is how and when the first peoples arrived. We'll probably never know the true answer to that, but most likely they came a variety of ways: through the Bering Land Bridge, following big game like woolly mammoth, or over boats from, Southeast Asia over to the West Coast. What we ultimately know is that these people spread out through North, Central, and South America and developed into diverse societies, really based on the environments in which they've lived. So at the bottom here, you'll see a smattering of different areas in North America, but it is possible something might come up about Central America and the Aztecs, the Mayans, the groups that the Spanish came into contact with in the 16th century. I have seen a short answer question asking A, B, and C to explain how the environment impacted different Native American groups. So what you might want to know and remember is kind of how the climate or the environment in each one of these geographical regions impacted the development of those societies. So in the Southwest, it's very hot and arid, desert-like conditions. The Pueblos were a group of a Native American group that with lots of different tribes throughout the area, that they lived in adobe brick buildings that they made, out of mud. They also lived in caves that they carved into the cliffs. All of the Native Americans use their environment to develop and to create these unique societies. There's also the Hopi Indians in this region in what is now Arizona, New Mexico, up to Colorado and Southern California. The Plains Indians, there's lots and lots of different tribes here. What you need to know about them is they were mostly nomadic tribes. They traveled around and hunted buffalo. Before the Europeans arrived, as we'll talk about in a second, there were no horses, and so they did all of this hunting by foot. Their way of life will drastically change when the Europeans arrive and introduce horses onto the continent, and it will change the way that they hunt. But before, they were still very successful doing it without horses. Buffaloes were sacred to them. They made teepees out of buffalo hides, which they would then pick up and carry with them as the buffalo herds migrated. There were lots of different tribes, and they fought for territory. They were always trying to find the best place to winter. And so there was lots of intertribal warfare as they kind of staked out where they would, but then also alliances, trade networks as well. There was lots of interaction between the different tribes throughout the plains. It's a huge portion of the United States. In the Southeast, we have, Georgia, Florida, that part of South Carolina. The Southeast Native Americans are sometimes referred to as the 5 civilized tribes: the Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Creeks, and the Seminoles. They also had tribal alliances. and had a lot of interaction with the Americans in the early 19th century once the United States was developed. They had, great climate for growing crops such as beans, squash, corn, tobacco. They lived in, semi-permanent villages where they farmed crops, and they also hunted as well. And then uh, the Northeast, there's lots of different tribes here as well, but again, good climate and these forests in the Northeast, the Hopewell, the Iroquois. Um, they had important trade networks throughout, but they also lived in permanent villages where they farmed, lived in these like long houses. Different tribes had different things, but an important piece to note about all of these is kind of the permanence of them. They were not all nomadic, as kind of likes to be painted about Native Americans, but rather they had really complex societies, lots of intertribal alliances, trade networks, and warfare. We can move to the next slide. And this is 1492. Christopher Columbus arrives in what is now Haiti in the Dominican Republic, sometimes called Hispaniola, and sets off the Columbian Exchange. So the Columbian Exchange is a term historians use to describe this time period of trade between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. It was an exchange of food, animals, ideas and people, and diseases. And it had, drastic consequences for all three continents. For how this will show up, there's always a question about the Columbian Exchange. Usually it'll ask about population changes. So due to all of these kind of starchy vegetables like potatoes and corn coming to Europe, you actually have a population increase because they get access to a lot more food that helps people to live longer. There was a lot of starvation in Europe before. The population decline happens in the Americas as Native American societies are exposed to diseases like smallpox and swine flu, and all of these diseases that they had no immunity to. And so populations in the Americas were decimated. By some accounts, 90% of villages or tribes were wiped out by these diseases, which then led to colonization of these areas and kind of a European superiority complex that they were meant to come and conquer these territories. It also had drastic consequences for Africa, as the import of enslaved Africans began when European nations couldn't enslave Native Americans as they were dying out from disease. We'll touch upon the growth of slavery a little bit more in later periods. Okay, Zoe is going to take it from here, and I will be around to answer any questions you guys have in the chat.
Okay, so now we're on period 2. So like period 1, it's a small percentage of the exam. You're not going to see a DBQ on period 2, but you might see an SAQ or multiple choice questions about this. And it's important to note about the time period it takes place in. And that helped me a lot when I took it, is understanding like where period 2 falls and kind of what it's about. So 1607 is the establishment of Jamestown, and 1754 is the end of the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War is mainly period 2, or the beginning, I should say, the beginning of the French and Indian War. And that's really talked about in period 3, but that time period in between there is really period 2, understanding European empire building, how the British came to America and established different types of colonies, and how slavery in the colonies became more rampant. Oh, went back one. There we go. Okay, so European empire building. When they talk about European empires, you're going to predominantly hear about 4 different European countries colonizing the Americas: the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English. Obviously, you're probably going to hear more about the English because the English colonized America, but it's important to know about the other 3 and their motivations for colonization, where they colonized, etc. So the Spanish is pretty much the first European country to colonize the Americas. And like every AP Euro, AP World, or even basic global class you've ever taken, you've probably heard that the motivation for Spanish colonization is the 3 Gs: God, gold, and glory. And it holds true here too. The Spanish were motivated to convert as many natives to Catholicism as they could. They thought that their polytheistic, religions were inhumane. They thought they were savages, and they thought it was their duty as conquistadors to change that. Additionally, the amount of gold in these countries was rampant, and it led a lot of conquistadors to want to colonize to become more wealthy and to make Spain more wealthy. And lastly, we have glory. You still hear about Christopher Columbus, Francisco Pizarro, Cortez today. So they wanted their names to be forever in history books, as they've been. And it really motivated a lot of people and a lot of conquistadors to sail the Atlantic Ocean and to colonize various different parts of South, Central, and even like a little bit of Florida, which is North America. But an important thing to know about European empires is basically how they created their colonies. Everybody created different types of colonies in different places and for different reasons. And this does pop up on the test. The establishment of long-term settlements and colonies is a factor really unique to the Spanish and the English, especially the Spanish. They wanted to revolutionize the lives of their constituents. They wanted to change the natives' lives. They set up permanent colonies. They were very involved in their natives' lives, and it wasn't just about trade to them. It was about revolutionizing people's lives. And they colonized mainly Central and South America, so we're talking about Peru, Mexico, etc. This differentiates severely from France and the Netherlands settlements, who weren't really concerned about that. Some important terms you're going to need to know about European empires are the encomenda system. When talking about Spanish colonization, it does come up a lot. And for the purposes of the APUSH exam, you need to know that it's a labor system in between the Spanish government, conquistadors, and the natives that are being colonized. Conquistadors were given land by the Spanish government, and within that land, the natives will be working through a contracted system that, for lack of a better term, could be considered a slave system. They weren't treated very well, but it is a labor system. Next, an important way that the Spanish really kept their interest and their power over their colonies, was to intermarry. They very commonly had children with natives, which is created this term of a mestizo, which is half Spanish, half native. If you see that on exam, it might pop up. It's one term, but it is something that does kind of explain the relationship between Native Americans and the Spanish. And lastly, we have Pope's Rebellion or Pueblo's Revolt. Either one of them, they might pop up, but you do need to know, and it's probably a really good fact for an SAQ or something like that. It is a slave rebellion in Mexico. It was very successful in the terms that it showed the Spanish that there was someone pushing back against them. They were pushing back against the Spanish trying to strip them of their culture, and it definitely changed the relationship between Spanish conquistadors and their constituents and how they approached their constituents later on. Next, we have French colonization. You don't need to know the establishment of Quebec in 1608. I was just trying to give you like a little time period. But the guy who founded the French territories was Samuel de Champlain, probably the only French name you're going to see on the exam. So if you see it, it's probably him. And they wanted to establish alliances for trade, not to really colonize. They weren't looking for long-term settlements or really to revolutionize the lives of the people or the natives in Canada. They spread Catholicism. it was an object of theirs. They thought, like the Spanish, it was a good way to spread religious beliefs, but it wasn't their primary goal. The fur trade was a big thing in Canada and in England, not in England, France, in Europe. Even now, people wear mink coats, they wear fur coats, an example of wealth. So when the French realized how much fur was really sitting around Canada, not being purchased or even traded, they jumped on the opportunity to create more money. So they established trading outposts based on native networks and alliances, and that was the primary goal of colonization versus long-term settlements and colonization. Some terms that are probably going to pop up are also the Algonquin. This is probably going to come more in period 3 with the French and Indian War, but it's just their main allies in the native, and they're going to see a pattern between a good relationship between the two of them throughout history. Last but not least, we have the Dutch colonization. So the Dutch are very similar to the French. There's probably not much more I can give to you about the Dutch. Once again, they were really prioritizing establishing trade networks and alliances. They were also heavily involved in the fur trade, and they wanted to create relationships with the natives, positive relationships that would benefit both of them economically. So whether it was trading weapons with the natives in exchange for fur, goods, anything like that, it was really centered around the idea of exchanging mutually benefit goods. Some names you might see around there are Henry Hudson, the guy who sailed in 1609 across the Atlantic and established New Amsterdam, and the Dutch East India Trading Company. So this company was a charter company that helped spread European ideals through money. One of the very first examples of capitalism you're going to see in APUSH. There will be very many more. They funded a lot of expeditions, and they were very involved in creating a profitable trade system and profitable connections between the two. So another important thing I think you might see in between the French and the Dutch is intermarriage. Like the Spanish, they used it. It was just used as an alliance tool. You marry off your women, you get more alliances. That is the different ones. But the most important one you're probably going to see is the English, and probably the most impactful on the exam. And the English were very similar to the Spanish. They wanted money, they wanted gold. They saw how much the Spanish made based off of these expeditions and thought that they could do the same. And that was the product of the Chesapeake colonies. So before we even get into Jamestown, you might see this on the exam, you might not, but it's important to know that Jamestown was not the first English settlement. It was the first successful English settlement. First, we have the lost colony of Roanoke. Not really in the curriculum, it's kind of hidden in there, but it failed due to starvation and inorganization. No one knows exactly what happened to it, but we take a pretty good guess that they were not prepared for the terrain and the conditions of North America. Jamestown almost ended up the same way. Jamestown was full of a bunch of men who wanted to put their impact on the world and make a lot of money, things that they were not being able to do in England, and they thought they had a better shot in the newer colonies, but they were not prepared once again, and this led to a lot of starvation, a lot of inorganization, and overall almost another failure like Roanoke. And we can attribute the success of Jamestown to two people, John Smith and John Rolfe. John Smith was like a mayor. He helped establish an organization. He helped provide structure. And John Rolfe helped to teach the people of the Chesapeake and of Virginia how to cultivate tobacco and survive. Tobacco will continuously be Virginia's most profitable crop until the Civil War. Virginia is very heavily planted in plantation culture, and we can thank that to John Rolfe, who taught the people of Jamestown how to sustain themselves. Additionally, another Chesapeake colony is Maryland. You're not going to need to know like a bunch about Maryland, but what you should know is that Maryland was a colony full of Catholics. They were kind of outcasted by everybody else, and they create the very first freedom of religion or religious toleration piece of legislation called the Act of Toleration. Additionally, people did not want to move to the Americas, especially around the time of Jamestown. So the head right system is something you're going to see on the exam. It's very similar to an idea later on, like the 50 acres and a mule. Here, they're giving people 50 acres for every indentured servant you bring. So if you bring 3 indentured servants, you would get 150 acres. This was to motivate more people to go to Jamestown because when they saw that they weren't making any gold, there really was no reason for people to go. And lastly, we have a joint stock company. So kind of like the Dutch East India Company that we kind of reviewed, there's a lot of terms I'm throwing at you. But a joint stock company is a joint trust where several people can fund without taking risk. That sounds like very economical. A little more simple than that. Expeditions are expensive. They're not cheap. And when they fail, it can be very devastating economically. So a lot of people were not very willing not only to go to the colonies, but to fund the trip to the colonies. The joint stock companies is a group of people who they place money in a trust, and the only risk is losing the initial amount of money you put in that trust, instead of losing the interest in the other millions of dollars you would have put in. Next, we have the New England colonies. So just for reference, there's 4 groups of colonies. I didn't mention that. And in order geographically, it's Southern on the bottom, Chesapeake, Middle, New England. So right after the Chesapeake was settled, we're going to see the settling of New England. Now, the makeup of New England is entirely different than the Chesapeake. The Chesapeake is filled with a bunch of guys, a bunch of men who wanted to make money. You're going to see the complete opposite with New England. New England was filled with a lot of families, a lot of religious families who moved away from Europe and England for religious persecution, to get away from religious persecution, or overall to have religious freedom, to express their religious beliefs freely and be able to live in harmony together. That was not the case with the Chesapeake. They just wanted money. So the genetic makeup of the Chesapeake is very heavily male dominated. There's not very many women in the Chesapeake. While in New England, you're going to see a lot more of a family-oriented society and a lot more of a group. So the New England is filled with a lot of different religious groups, and they do get confusing. So a little bit of a history lesson. You probably have heard about it in your AP World, AP Euro, any other global class you were taken. The Church of England is the Church of England. They are called Anglicans. It's a Protestant sect, but it's also very close to Catholicism. So because of that, a lot of people had some issues with the Church of England. From that, 2 different groups emerge. There's the Separatist and the Puritans. And they're basically what their name says. The Separatists wanted to separate from the Church of England. The Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England. People just keep on popping up. Okay, we're good. So, separate, purify. Pretty easy to remember. But also what I always got confused was remembering what type of religion are the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims are separatist. They wanted to separate. They left and they went to Plymouth Rock because they did not like the Church of England. They thought it was unsavable, too Catholic, and they needed to leave. So in 1620, the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth Rock, created Plymouth County, and that would eventually become a part of Massachusetts, but then they were very separate, and they created their own doctrines and constitutions based off their ideals collectively. Next, we have the creation of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, this is probably one of the more important New England colonies because John Winthrop created this colony as a city upon a hill. So I've gotten practice questions. I think there might have even been a question on last year's exam of like a source revolving around this ideology of a city upon a hill, and you had to understand what that meant. It's kind of what it sounds like. A city upon a hill is just like a city that is closest to God. It is very idealistic. They are very rooted in morals and their religious beliefs. So much so it is a city upon a hill. It's as high as you can get. So because of that, John Winthrop and his people were very strict about who can be in their society. So if you dissented against, you were kicked out. And a lot of people were kicked out. And the 2 most important people that were probably kicked out that you'll see on the exam are Roger Williams, sorry, who created the Rhode Island colony. He was a Massachusetts Bay Colony dissenter. He wasn't really that important. They only spent too much time on him. But someone you probably have heard about and is probably more commonly spoken about is Anne Hutchinson, who was a dissenter who created the Portsmouth colony. Those two would merge. They're not going to ask you what colony did Roger Williams create. But Anne Hutchinson, you might get a source on her again. She's one of the very first feminists you're going to see in your APUSH readings, your APUSH course. She was just kicked out because she didn't feel as though it was a woman's place to speak on these religious matters, and she didn't like that, so she created her own colony. And last but not least, we have Connecticut. Connecticut is not that important. The only thing you might see about it is that they had the very first American Constitution. It's called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. That'd be really great outside info if you're on a DBQ, if it's about the Constitution, on a SAQ if they ask about this time period, but the likelihood of you seeing that is very low. Next, we have the Middle Colonies. So we just talked about Henry Hudson last slide. Now Henry Hudson's whole colony becomes New York because the English bought it after the Duke of York. That's basically about New York in this period. It's not really that special, except for the fact that Pennsylvania and New York are trading hubs. They're basically, because of their geographical location, they're going to become very diverse cities. A lot of people are going to be coming in and out of them, and that's just because of their location and the easy access from the Atlantic. But in 1681, there's the creation of Pennsylvania by William Penn. You might see this once again. This is kind of like a John Winthrop situation where you might see something about Penn's holy experiment and you need to understand what it was. Similarly to Penn, it's a very idealistic, peaceful, and equal society. William Penn and his followers were Quakers, like the little oats thing that you see in the supermarket. I don't know if they still make it, but they wanted to create a colony that everybody was equal, because the Quakers felt as though they were different from everybody else. They wanted to create a colony where everyone was accepted and everyone felt as though they were equally supported. So that was Penn's holy experiment. So think about the two of them as creating the most idealistic, peaceful societies, something kind of religious, something very peaceful, but that's more so Penn's holy experiment, but both of them really had idealistic foundations, if you get what I'm trying to say here. Good question. They were more New England. You're not going to see, there were Puritans in the Chesapeake. Most of them were Anglicans, they were very Protestant, but the idea of Puritans and Pilgrims will be in the New England territories. That's where they migrated towards, and that's where they really established their roots. So Chesapeake, once again, they were Anglican, they were Protestant, they loved their religion, but the religious differences and the religious arguments, for lack of a better term, is going to be centered in New England. So if you read something about the Pilgrims, you read something about the Puritans and the Separatists, it's New England. And last but not least, we have the Southern Colonies. Once again, this is another one that's middle and southern kind of get like sidetracked because they're not as important, but the Southern Colonies in 1712, we see the creation of North and South Carolina. And then in 1732, James Oglethorpe created Georgia as a debtor colony and a buffer. Basically, he put all of Britain's poor into this little state, and because that state is right on top of Spanish Florida, in case the Spanish decided to like infiltrate the colonies, the most indispensable people would be closest to Florida. It sounds horrible. They basically put the poor people like as a barrier toward everybody else, but that's pretty much the only important thing about those states. You're not going to be tested on them. Like I said, really focus on the Chesapeake and New England and the differences between them, between that like male striving for a better life, get gold, very capitalistic, money-oriented ideology in the Chesapeake, and the very family, religious orientation in the New England colonies. Okay. Last but not least, we have slavery in the British colonies. So slavery was different in the North and in the South. In the North, they mostly relied on indentured servants. because of the lack of plantation culture and the reduced demand for slaves. So this is not to say the North did not have slaves. They had plenty of them. But because they didn't have as many plantations, they didn't rely on cash crops. Am I frozen? Am I? Oh, okay. Thank you. I got nervous. We're good. Okay, so because there wasn't as many plantation, so majority of the slaves were just sent to the South. It's that simple. Like, don't write on your exam, the North had no slaves. They did. They were not anti-slave. They just didn't need them as much. And indentured servants, if you do not remember, are agreements is an employee who agrees to work with an employer for a contracted period of time while being supported by the employer. So typically that time is 7 years. They work for the employer doing whatever the employer has contracted them to do. So that can be field work, that can be housework, that can be working on a ship, that can be working in a shop. Whatever the contract says, they will work for a certain period of time, and after that period of time, they are let go with a benefit of some sort that they agreed on. So whether it's money, home, acreage, land, that's the word, of acres, cattle, whatever it says. They just work for a certain period of time to get a benefit. And a lot of the times, indentured servants will work to death because you only have them for 7 years or 5 years, and you want to get as much work out of them as possible. So typically, they didn't even get to see the benefit, but that is what an indentured servant is. And they were mainly concentrated in the North. We're going to see plenty of them in the South as well. And most of those indentured servants and slaves were domestic servants, dock workers, sailors, and craft workers. Not really a lot of plantation workers or field workers or anything like that. They worked more in like the urban trading zone versus the cash crop zone. Meanwhile, in the slavery of the South, which is, I think, a little bit more obvious, the intensive labor and the need for the cultivation of tobacco and other cash crops led to more slaves. And a rich planter class benefited from race-based labor. So the reason that we're really going to see a lot of conflict going on is because there were so many more slaves in the South, a different race structure was definitely created based off the need of labor. Once again, there were slaves in the North, the South, just needed them more. And it definitely creates a different type of societal structure in the South that we've seen. So key terms and dates. In 1619, we have the beginning of the slave trade. Slaves started being imported to America. A large concentration went to the Southern Americas, the Central America, the Caribbean, and the South and North as well. So this is all over the Americas. Next, we have Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. Now, if you're going to take anything away from the slide, take this away. So it has to be one of the more important things on the slide. And as it is like the transition between indentured servitude to slavery, or the reliance upon it. So the date is also really important to remember. I know it's like one of those weird dates, but I remember it because it's 100 years before 1776. Like everybody knows that. So 1676. And that's Bacon's Rebellion. That's when Nathaniel Bacon led in a rebellion of poor white indentured servants and farmers against the higher royal Virginian class, the mayor of Virginia at the time, and it spooked this rich planter-based class. It scared them. They realized that these indentured servants might be a threat. The white poor class might be a threat, and we should no longer be using them for labor because they pose a threat to our money and our livelihoods. So because of that, we see a complete transition from indentured servitude to slavery. They begin to think that Black slaves are less of a threat. They're not as much of a threat to their livelihoods and to their money. Therefore, they are better to use. So we see this shift from indentured servitude to slavery. And I've seen that used in an SAQ question before, and you just need to understand that Bacon's Rebellion is a turning point from indentured servants to slavery because of Nathaniel Bacon's rebellion of white poor people in Virginia against the richer classes. Lastly, two terms that you've probably once again seen. We have the triangular trade, which is basically the triangle in which trade was happening during this time. It extends from Europe to Africa, Africa to America, America to Europe. And the middle passage is the part of that triangle between Africa and America where slaves are being transported. It's known as being very traumatic and very rough to get through. We've reached the end of period 2. So we're going to finally get to the fun part, and then we're going to get kind of into questions. So I want to do the practice quiz and then ask any questions you have after that. So yeah, please join the practice quiz. Matter of fact, let me switch the slides for everyone now. Yes, I am going to post the link right now in the chat. Wait, do it? No? Oh, we can do it. Okay. Music. There we go.
Who's hyped for this quiz? Woo!
I know, I just spoke a lot, so this is like the fun part.
We can tell from the music.
I know. Get excited. Y'all do got this. Oh, did I never send the link? I'm so sorry. That's my fault. It was in the bar to send, and I just never clicked send. I sent it. I'll send it again. Oh, do you guys want dark mode? Like one person is looking. You like dark? Okay, I changed it. We have almost everyone in. So I'm gonna give everyone like a minute or two to join. Remember, it's okay if you don't get it right now. We're gonna go over each question. This music is a vibe, I'm not gonna lie. Can I explain what started Bacon's Rebellion? I thought it was just Of course I can. That's not a problem at all. So Bacon's Rebellion is an issue primarily with the upper classes of you might be thinking of Pope's Rebellion, Pope's Rebellion, or Pueblo's Revolt. That is really centered around oh my god, I will turn it on right now. Hold on, wait. There we go. A little below. Basically Pueblo's Revolt or Pope's Rebellion is centered and it's really about Native Americans revolting against Spanish control. But this is really the lower poor classes of Virginia revolting against the higher classes and posing a threat. So it's more centered around. No, it hasn't started yet. I'm talking. I'm sorry. I'll start it now. But posing a threat to their money and their rights. We talk about Shays Rebellion. We can. I think we'll get onto that later on. That's not yet. And can I further elaborate on the headline? We're going to talk more about Q&A after the exam. So please save all of these amazing questions till after. I'm going to start the exam, the quiz. So first question. What was Jamestown? A, the first permanent English settlement in the New World. B, the first permanent Spanish settlement in the New World. First permanent French, or the first permanent Dutch. And wait for everyone to answer. Oh, funny. We have about 2 more people. I think we're good. We got everybody. All right. Okay. Wow. That was actually really good. Yes, this is something you really do need to know. Jamestown, English, 1607. The Spanish, that's 1492 with Christopher Columbus. So remember English. But that was really good. Good start. So, a person who agreed to work without wages for a specific period of time in exchange for a passage to the colonies was a. Is it frozen? Okay, no, it's not. Thank you. It is definitely E. You all should pick that answer. I might have some festive fires for you guys too. We're almost there. Need like 5 more people to answer. Almost there. 2 people off. Okay, we're there. Ready? Okay. We were almost at 100. We were almost there, but I'm going to take it. Yes, it is an indentured servant. A settler, that's just someone who settles. So there's not really a agreeing to work for a period % of time. And a slave, there's no agreement at all. You're just kind of taken and moved. But a indentured servant is an agreement between 2 people, typically an employer and employee. But yeah, we were close. We were close. I think everyone pretty much got it. We just need to understand the difference between settler and slave and indentured servant. One moves optionally, one is getting a service, and one is definitely not moving optionally. Next question. Although the main goal of blank efforts were to extract minerals and resources from the land, an impact they had on native populations was converting them into Christianity and ultimately incorporating them into their colonial society. So A, African, B, French, C, Dutch, D, Spanish. I didn't write the question, but yeah, converting is a generous term, not gonna lie. I'll really give it hints. All right. Okay. So we got a large percentage. It is Spanish. Yes, the French did convert people to Christianity and Catholicism, but it was not their primary goal. When we talked about like the motivation, yeah, someone just said it there. It's trade based. The French and the Dutch, well, the French was definitely like, okay, if we like if we converted a couple people to Catholicism, like great, it's chill, it's a great idea. But the French and the Dutch were more concerned about like just establishing some good trade and getting as much money. Yeah, they were buddy. You guys are really writing this in good terms. They were good with the natives. They had a really great communication, I guess you could say. They had really good alliances. But the Spanish were all about converting people very brutally. I mean, think about Spanish conquistadors. And they were very, exactly, forceful conversion is probably the best way to think about it. and incorporating them into their colonial society is very important. So, and also think minerals and resources. Minerals means gold. So remember the God, gold, and glory. So extracting gold while also converting to Catholicism and Christianity. Although no gold was found in Jamestown, it became economically profitable due to no, to answer somebody's question, the English were not really about converting. That's more the Spanish and French. Okay, we got everyone? Oh, we were so close. So close. Yes, please put your questions in the Q&A section so that the other hosts are much easier for them to answer. Yeah, it's tobacco. Remember John Ralph, that guy, came in and taught the people of Jamestown how to cultivate tobacco in order to make money and sustain themselves. Rice would happen later on. Timber, well, that's wood. So they weren't really chopping down wood. And fish, you don't really fish in the southern areas. It's more of the New England middle colonies. So, the natives did, yes, but with John Ralph's help. So who did the British take over the colony of New York from? So remember that New York was a colony. We talked about this. Someone colonized it beforehand, and it was called something else, and then it became New York. As much hints as I can give it to you. Okay. Yeah, it was New Amsterdam. So remember, New Amsterdam with Henry Hudson became New York when the English bought it over. So it's okay. That's not going to be one of your questions. It's a good contextualized thing to know. So New Amsterdam became New York. Which colony was created as a safe haven for Catholics? The person who's giving the best hint in the comments. This is a one-time thing, but these questions could be filmed. I'm gonna reveal it, but yeah. Okay. So it was Maryland. We want to remember Massachusetts do not like Catholicism. They're not about the Catholics. Yes, the Spanish did convert. It's okay. It's okay, guys. Massachusetts was heavily Protestant. They were Puritan and separatist. They do not like Catholics. Virginia, also a bunch of Puritans, bunch of Protestants. Rhode Island, they were also Protestant. They were just a different They just also got kicked out of Massachusetts. But Maryland was all about the Catholics. It's okay. Maryland, yeah. Maryland. Whatever helps you guys, but that is a good hint. Yeah, someone knew what I was talking about. Quaker Oats. I didn't know if that was like a random thing, but like, yeah, please do. Well, I'm from New York, so New York is the best state. Sorry. We're almost there. Ooh. You're good. Okay. All right. We're close. We were close. Yeah, Pennsylvania. Think about the holy experiments everyone was saying, the Quakers. That is a group very peaceful, very about everyone's rights. This is our last question for the first two periods. We'll move on to a quick Q&A and then on to Emmy's section. All right. We were almost there on our last question, almost got a full 100, but it is a cash crop. The cash crop economy, the plantation economies, led to a high demand for slavery. That was the answer. So we're going to go back into the slides, do a really quick Q&A. Please drop any questions you might have in the chat. We're going to go over to period 3. Oh, I realize we have the, I'm not even thinking right. We have the practice SAQ.
Can I just briefly touch? I'm seeing a lot of similar questions about religion. I just want to kind of answer those all together and also let you all know you do not need to know things in this level of detail for the exam. But just so you have like a clear understanding, Christianity is a big umbrella religion. Most people, we're going back, this is like more AP Euro than anything else, but it's important to know for kind of how it filters to America. But you have like the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. Orthodox is more like Eastern Europe, Greece, it's called Eastern Orthodox. The Catholics believe in the Pope, and the Protestant Reformation happens before any of this colonization, but leads to a group of all these different groups that fit under the Protestant bubble. So most of the colonies were set up by Protestants, right? The Church of England even breaks away from the Catholic Church because King Henry wanted to get a divorce. He creates a religion very similar to Catholicism, but he puts him as the head of the church as opposed to the Pope, so he could do what he wants. Then you have Puritans, separatists saying we want to really make the Church of England more Protestant and less Catholic. So that's where that purify or separate comes from. You don't really need to know that level of detail. Just know that they wanted to create their own communities where they could practice their religion. And they tended to not extend the toleration that they wanted to anybody else. Then you have Quakers. Quakers are another Protestant sect who believe that everyone should be equal. William Penn is facing persecution in England for being a Quaker, and so he gets permission from the king to establish Pennsylvania, and it becomes a haven for Quakers. So now Quakers and then all different religions can go there and practice freely. Someone asked about separation of church and state. Roger Williams is important to know. He is banished from Massachusetts Bay Colony and he goes and founds Rhode Island based on this idea that anyone can practice their religion. So these themes of freedom of religion and separation of church and state come from kind of these early founding members of their colonies. Maryland is an exception. Someone mentioned it in the chat, Lord Baltimore. He creates Maryland colony as a haven for Catholics because the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth in England, and there's a time when the Catholics are being persecuted, and so they can go there and again practice freely. Someone asked about the Toleration Act. That is an act passed in Maryland that said anyone, any Christian, can practice their religion, whether they're Protestant or Catholic. But again, it's very interesting history, but you don't need to know that level of detail. They're never going to ask you about separatists or pilgrims or Puritans, or like to explain the differences between them. You just kind of need to know this overall thing. I think I hit upon most of those religion questions that were popping up, but if you have any more, you could ask me in the Q&A. Okay, you can do the practice SAQ.
Let's say, yes, we're gonna hit the break period soon. I promise you all.
I just want to say, you could take a break at any time, guys.
Yeah.
This is all going to be recorded, so feel free, do what you need to do to get through the next few hours, the next few nights.
Y'all ready? Okay. We do have 2 hours left, but we're going to switch pace here. And instead of talking about content, we're going to talk about applying that content to an SAQ. So an SAQ, the SAQ we're really going to look at is a 2022 practice SAQ. Now, SAQs, there's typically, you have to answer 3 of them in 40 minutes. You have 13 minutes for each. And the first 2 are mandatory. They're source-based. You cannot opt out of them. But the last one, you have a choice between 2 different ones, and you get to decide which one you'd like to use. So this is one of those optional ones where you can decide whether you want to pick this one or another one. And as someone who took this exam, I'm going to be very honest with you. I did not pick this one. But I think it is important to know how to answer these questions. Yeah, Emmy said the same. I don't know if you picked it, but I definitely didn't. I saw the other one. I was like, this is not good for me. But I think it is important just to like understand the information. And now looking back on how to answer the question, it's actually not that bad. And I think if you understand everything Andrea and I just kind of said, this can be a pretty easy SAQ to do. So let's dive in. The first question is asking to briefly describe one way that Native American society adapted to the environment prior to European contact. The second one, briefly explain one similarity in how Native American societies in 2 regions adapted to European contact from 1492 to 1763. The last part, briefly explain one difference in how Native American societies in 2 regions adapted to European contact from 1492 to 1763. So, we got long-winded. We're going to break this down. I'm not just going to throw this all at you, but talk about the rubric for all SAQs. So each SAQ is worth 3 points. So technically, all of your SAQs together, because you answer 3, are out of 9 points, and that's 20% of your exam. So for each SAQ, you get 1 point for part A, 1 point for part B, and 1 point for part C. And in order to earn each point, you need to answer the question accurately, clearly, describe your answer thoroughly, and explain the historical relationship completely. Now, it sounds like I just repeated the same thing 4 times. I promise I didn't. Because you can answer the question accurately, but if you aren't describing it enough, you're not going to get the point. Even now, I still get on like my AP Gov SAQs, like I don't explain it enough. You have to take it to the next step and really explain the relationships and the content enough that the reader understands that you know what you're talking about. So, tips and tricks. First one, and I mean this in the less aggressive way, but please get to the point. You have 13 minutes to write each SAQ, so please do so quickly. Like your reader and you both don't have time to sit there and read 4-page papers. You don't have the time to write it, so you need to be specific and clear and a quick amount of time. Also, do not label or bullet point your answers. Label your answers clearly. So write A, write your 3 sentences, write B, write your 3 sentences, and then C, write your 3 sentences. So make sure it's clear so when the reader reads it, they know what you're talking about. These are still people reading them, and you want them to be able to understand what you're talking about. Your opening sentence should be your claim or your thesis. Remember, you don't have time to write a very elaborate paragraph. You want to be quick. It might not be your best writing, but it is writing, and it needs to answer the prompt. You don't need to restate, but if it helps, go for it. I personally like restating, just how I write my SAQs, so if that helps you, as long as you're answering the question, go for it. And once again, answer the question efficiently and fully. Do your best to answer every component of the question. You can only gain points. So the first one, and this was the College Board example of the best way to write this, and briefly describe one way one Native American society adapted to its environment prior to European contact. The person answered, the Pueblo people in the Southwest adapted to their environment by building permanent structures of clay and stone into the side of cliffs, which are still around today. These buildings provided refuge from the heat in the Southwest and led to the creation of permanent sedentary societies. This was not, the most elite writing you probably have ever read. It's probably not the most elite writing this person has ever written, but it did answer the question. It is asking for one way that one Native American society, so remember Andrea went over all these different Native American societies and how they all had different livelihoods and lived differently based off of where they were geographically located. This person picked the Southwest and the Pueblo people. So they talked about how it adapted to its environment prior to European contact. So this has to be before 1492. You should be talking about nothing revolving around Europeans here. And this person did that. B. Briefly explain one similarity in how 2 different regions adapted to European contact from 1492 to 1763. So this is a large period of time. You're talking basically from part of period 1 to chunk of period 3. But the native people in both French Canada and Dutch New Netherland adapted to the European contact by engaging in trade with those nations and in coexisting economically. French Canada's fur trade with the native peoples allowed 2 groups to mutually benefit, natives getting finished goods and encouraged peaceful coexistence. Very similarly, the Dutch traded with native peoples as well, trading furs and weapons. Even those occurred in different regions of NA or North America, the native groups had similar interactions and goals from those interactions: trading, getting goods, weapons. Once again, not the best writing in the world, but it answered the question of comparing 2 different Native American societies and how they adapted to European contact. Here, they related French Canada and Dutch New Netherland, and how, since the French and the Dutch had similar motives in their colonization, they had very similar adaptations to European contact, which we talked about before. Lastly, briefly explain one difference in how Native American societies in 2 different regions adapted to European contact from 1492 to 1763. So now it's asking for the complete opposite of the first question, the last question, sorry. So while groups in the Southwest fought back against European control, groups in the Northwest allied with Europeans to destroy other native groups. The Pueblo Revolt was the most successful example of native resistance, kicking the Spanish out of the Pueblo territory on their own to preserve their culture, which caused the Spanish to be more accommodating when they returned. Meanwhile, the Pico War in the northeast fought between the Pico and the Mohang and the British. The Mohang wanted to destroy alternative culture to gain control of the British trade, and did so instead of trying to preserve it and remove from the British. Once again, probably not the best writing, but did it effectively answer the question? Yes. It showed how two different Native American societies adapted to European contact differently. They did this quickly. They did this in 3 sentences. Remember, the first one was only 2 sentences. So if you can write it quickly, write as quickly and briefly as possible. So that's kind of the collective, and this person earned a full 3 points because it was clear, concise, and answered all of the questions. And that's kind of what you need to do, if that makes sense. You don't need to write a beautiful essay. You need to write something that when your reader reads it, they know that you know how to write an SAQ. No, there is no sophistication for the SAQ. This is not about writing something, connecting it to different time periods. This is strictly about answering the question. You do need to do 3 SAQs. I mean, like, typically there's 3 SAQs for you to do, but the last one, there's 2 options. So you do 3 of them, but you get to pick between 2 of them, if that makes sense. And you get 13 minutes per SAQ, so 40 minutes total, and that is 20% of your exam. So yeah, that is the average length of an SAQ should be about 3 sentences. I've heard some teachers say, you can go to 4. Yeah, 13 minutes is a little bit crazy, but you can go to 4 sentences if it's what you need to do. Some SAQs require you to do 2. Remember that part A was only 2 sentences, and you really only need to set out a claim, put your evidence, and analyze how that connects back to the question. You want to consistently make this as quick as possible. You don't really need to make it a very nice and loving, well-written essay. It can be a little bit messy. It can have some abbreviations. This one, I actually took a lot of the abbreviations out. They abbreviated a lot because they wanted to write as quickly as possible. So we've reached the end here. So if there is any questions about period 1 or period 2, now, and the SAQ, now is the time to throw those in the chat. And someone, per question, you have 13 minutes. This is kind of the break, yeah. Please take a break. Walk away from your computer screens. Yeah, we've have a little bit of a lot of time, so we're doing pretty well. Over the spigot specific.
I saw someone say that they didn't eat dinner yet, so if you need to do that,
please
go eat.
Please. Yes, I saw your question earlier too. The headright system is a system to encourage your Englishmen to come to America. So for every indentured servant you are bringing with you from England, you got 50 acres of land when you reach the Americas. So if you decide to bring 3 indentured servants over with you from England, then you have 150 acres of land. The specific religious ideologies. So as Andrea was really going over earlier, you're going to see a lot of Puritans, separatists in the New England region. Then the other regions are largely Protestant, meaning they aren't Catholic, except for Maryland, which was kind of that outlier. The Pueblos Revolt. That was a revolt in Mexico against the Spanish. It's also called Pope's Rebellion. It's basically the Mexican, the region of the Native Americans living there felt as though the Spanish was suppressing their culture. They were trying to strip them of it, which they were. So they revolted against the Spanish in an attempt to reclaim their culture and to revolt and to show assert their dominance and really gain back their culture. And it worked to the extent that the Spanish and the relationship between the pueblos living there shifted. They weren't as, I guess you could say stripping, but it definitely changed the mindset of the Spanish when colonizing these countries. These definitely use Fiveable's resources on Unit 1 and 2. It breaks like another 10 minutes, so you guys are good. Please eat something, have some water. Fiveable has entire unit reviews on Unit 1, 2. They also have little practice quizzes, like when you open the library. So a lot of them are like the questions from today. Take your time, go over them. There's also like, I think it's a little late in the game for like getting a Princeton review book, but if you have that, I would suggest using it. Any of your notes from class. Okay. What's the difference between a Puritan, Pilgrim, and Separatist? So, Pilgrims and Separatists, same thing. They both, Separatists want to separate from the Church of England. They wanted to separate from Anglicans, and Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England. So this is kind of in the name, and Pilgrims are separatists, so just think of them as one. But purify Church of England, Puritans, separatist, separate from Church of England. Yes, it was like when they encouraged the homestead. That's how I remember them. I had the same thing when I was going over. I guess I've seen a lot of people abbreviate. They put NA. They put, I don't know if you've ever seen like the abbreviation for with or without. They did a lot of that. So as long as the content's there, I guess your readers don't really mind. No, there's no certain keywords. I just think answering the questions to the best of your ability is really the key of an SAQ. Also, please put these questions in the Q&A so other people, it's a lot of them, so I want to make sure the questions are answered. Colonies did need charters. I mean, a lot of them, they were chartered by England. They weren't just like randomly created. So it wasn't just like they just spurred out of nowhere. English were very involved in the chartering of each one. You personally, what I know is that a lot of times it's up to teachers' discretion, but most teachers will do this. They'll tell you, like, oh, I don't know if they'll tell you about the SAQs, and that's the only thing. I think you need to keep your own time for the SAQs, but they'll tell you when the time is over. What they will tell you is when time to shift from your TBQ to your LEQ. So I'm sorry about that one, but you do need to kind of keep your own
Definitely
time.
For your test, bring a watch. Don't bring an Apple Watch, but bring like, I don't know, a regular watch.
Yeah, not an electronic one, but your SAQs.
And then something that I did was I like took off my watch and I put it right next to me while I took the test so I could see it. The kid next to me brought a Rolex. I was like, what are you doing? But
that's so smart. I didn't even think about that. I just looked at the clock and struggled reading like don't waste your time that way. That's actually really smart. Please bring a watch. Mikkel, I'm confused on what you mean too. French example thingy you mentioned. Aubrey, everything will be posted like this whole review, so please take your time and review it. We're going to talk about the American Revolution next, so you're good. Maya, rewatch the video, take notes at your own discretion, take your time.
Should we move on to period 3?
So I don't know when you wanted to start and how long you wanted this break to be. So I was kind of stalling.
Okay. I think we can move on. If you're away from your screens, run back now. Are we on the period 3 slide? Okay. Hi guys. I'm Emmy. I don't know if you guys forgot that from the beginning, but I'm going to be going over period 3, which is from 1754 to the 1800s, and we'll be going over the causes of the American Revolution, the actual war, the Constitution, and the early Federalist era. Next slide. Yeah, you're good. So just to set the scene, the Ohio River Valley was sort of a place that was like a competition for resources, such as beaver fur, and it sort of set the stage for a huge clash between the British and the French. And although Benjamin Franklin had warned against an inevitable conflict between the two powers and had suggested the Albany Plan to establish a coordinated defense against the attack, the colonies were unwilling to give up their autonomy to unite. So you can see the snake on the left, and those are sort of all the different colonies. And since they didn't join together, they didn't really act too well, and they died. Oops. So upon the conclusion of the British did actually win the war, and that ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763. And the colonials believed that they had shown their importance and worth to their mother country, which is Britain, by winning this war. But the Crown and the Parliament felt otherwise, and from their perspective, they felt that the colonies did not contribute enough to the war, and thus were responsible for paying for the war. And that sort of sets the scene for the American Revolution. Next slide. Sorry. So because they want the colonists to pay the taxes from the French and Indian War, the period of salutary neglect ended as Parliament began to enforce its mercantilism policies and taxes to pay for the cost of the French and Indian War. And although the proclamation of 1763 offended many Western colonists, the real trouble began with implementing the Stamp Act in 1765. And pretty much previous taxes all impacted the wealthy, but the stamp tax on all printed documents affected everyone. So this meant if you had to buy a book, it was taxed. If you bought the newspaper, it was taxed. Pretty much anything with paper. In addition, it was the first time the colonists were expected to pay such a direct tax, so this was a new era for them almost. And Patrick Henry, which is a name you need to know, started a movement with his beliefs in no taxation without representation, because pretty much they were being taxed, but they didn't really have any power within the government and things like that. And then, so these patriotic colonists united against the act, and they formed protesting groups such as the Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty. In addition, boycotts brought the colonies together under a common cause and inflicted economic damages upon the British Treasury. King George III and the Parliament implemented additional strategies for collecting revenue, such as the Sugar Act, the Townshend Act, the Intolerable and Coercive Acts, and pretty much all the acts listed on the slide right there, which ultimately led to the Boston Tea Party and the Intolerable and Coercive Acts, like I said, in the port of Boston. So another thing that we need to go over besides the taxes and protests are the philosophers of the Enlightenment period. Can we go to the next slide? Oh wait, do you guys want me to go back a slide to review something?
Yeah, I think they want you to go back to the first one and review some things. The first one you were doing.
The 7 Years' War? Or the... Okay, I saw the chat. I'll slow down. I promise. Okay, so this slide. Just redo it. Oh. Okay, I'll redo it. Okay, so pretty much the 7 Years' War was sort of setting up the stage for a clash for like the Revolutionary War. And this started in the Ohio River Valley, and the Ohio River Valley had like a lot of resources. They had like beaver fur, which a lot of people wanted, and they had other resources for like mining and farming. And because of these resources, the British and the French like fought over these resources. And so they started a war. And then during the war, Benjamin Franklin sort of like warned against this whole war, but he also suggested the Albany Plan, which was sort of a plan to unite all of the colonies so that they could join together so that they could fight this war and, you know, win. So the colonies didn't unite, which was not very good, but they still ended up winning. So after that, there's a Treaty of Paris of 1763 that sort of ended the war. And it's important to also know that after they won, the colonials had believed that they had shown their like importance and worth to the Britain, and they were like, "Look, we're so independent. We won this war. Like, let us be on our own." But the crown and the parliament felt otherwise. And in fact, they actually felt that they didn't contribute enough. And so they were like, you need to pay for this war. Like, it's all your fault, pretty much. Okay. Should I go over this slide again too? Okay. Okay. So then after that, before that, like pretty much they didn't need to pay any taxes, and that era was sort of called salutary neglect. But that ended as soon as the parliament began to enforce its mercantilism policies and taxes to pay the costs of the French and Indian War. And although the proclamation of 1763 offended many Western colonists, the real trouble began when the Stamp Act was enacted in 1765. So the Stamp Act, unlike previous taxes that only impacted the rich people, affected everyone. So this was a huge issue because pretty much your books, your newspapers, like anything on paper would be taxed. And this was the first time the colonists were expected to pay such like a direct tax. And so Patrick Henry started a movement with his belief in no taxation without representation, which means that like, I mean, you're like taxing us, so like, why can't we be represented in the government or like have or act independently, you know? So after that, a lot of patriotic colonists united up against this act and formed protest groups such as the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. And they did, they had a lot of methods of protesting. They would like tar a lot of the British government officials, but a lot of their protests were peaceful. In addition, they would boycott like some of the companies, and together they all united under a common cause and inflicted a lot of economic damages upon the British Treasury. So after that, the King George III and the Parliament implemented additional strategies for collecting revenue, which would ultimately lead to the Boston Tea Party and the intolerable and coercive acts against the poor of Boston. And pretty much the Boston Tea Party is when they like a bunch of colonialists like snuck onto a ship late at night and dumped all the tea from a British trading company into the port of Boston. Okay, so it's also important to note that this era was marked by like the Enlightenment period. This is what the DBQ was on last year, so that was fun. Anyways, so in this era, there were a lot of important philosophers that came into light. Pretty much the Enlightenment period was in the 18th century, and it all emphasized like reason, individualism, and skepticism. And it laid the foundations for many of the values and ideas in modern Western society that we still see today. So central ideas included reason over relevation, like a blank state, natural rights, social contract, and the separation of powers. And I'll go over all those ideas like right now. So important figures during this movement were also like the founding fathers, like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. They were all influenced by these Enlightenment ideas. So one person to know is Thomas Hobbes. just to note, you don't really need to know the person, but rather you need to know like the sort of thing that like they argued for and that they supported. And he argued that people form governments to escape the state of war, and that the role of the government is to provide order and stability. So he's an important figure to note for like the social contract. And Baron de Montesquieu, sorry, I don't know how to say that. He argues for checks and balances and a separation of power in the government. We'll go over that later when the Constitution is actually founded. But checks and balances is just like a system to make sure that each branch of the government can sort of like check each other and make sure that everyone is doing their job correctly. And separation of powers is just that like there's separate powers in the federal and state and local level. And then Jean-Jacques Rousseau emphasized the importance of the common good and argued for the protection of natural rights. So natural rights was also something that Thomas Paine argued for in Common Sense. This is a document that you should know, but it pretty much inspired a lot of support for American independence, and it talked about a lot of the ideas of natural rights and representation. So your natural rights would include like the right to free speech, the right to protest, pretty much everything that we go over in the Bill of Rights. And we'll go over that later too. Okay, so now on to the war. Let's go. Okay. Okay, people in the chat did not see that hype, but so pretty much the war is started with the first shots in Lexington Green in 1775. And pretty much like the war was served by a lot of different demographics. White people, Black people, and Native Americans all served in some capacity to ensure a colonial victory. There were loyalists or Tories who supported the crown and faced challenges from home and abroad following the victory because they supported the British side. But and then some important battles to know is the Battle of Long Island, where mercenary soldiers or the Hessians were hired by Britain to fight, and they were pretty much like very brutal. That's like all you need to know. And then there's the Battle of Saratoga, which was a turning point in the war because after the victory of Saratoga, pretty much the French agreed to join the colonialists in their fight against Britain. And because of that political and economic support, America was able to win. And then another battle you need to know is the Battle of Yorktown. It's also a Hamilton song. I don't know if anyone knows that, but that's when the victory actually happens. You don't need to know more of the details about like the battle, like the three-pronged attack, things like that, but you need to know like bigger picture things. And these battles, I would say, are the most important. And then following the US victory over Britain, a new treaty created a unified 13 colonies under the United States of America. Okay. And then after the Revolutionary War, can we go to the next slide? Okay, thanks. So after the Revolutionary War, pretty much America made impacts on like local areas in America, but also there were also global implications from the revolution. So the Declaration of Independence declared that all men are created equal, but the women were not included. And so Abigail Adams advocated for women's rights and reminded her husband, President John Adams, to remember the ladies. And pretty much that was like a girl boss moment of her. It didn't really lead to much, but it is something that might come up on the exam. And during this time, a lot of the women during the American Revolution were still doing a lot of traditional domestic work. And the idea of Republican motherhood emerged as a way for women to fulfill their duty as good citizens by being responsible mothers who instill Republican principles in their children. So pretty much at this time, the most important job for a woman is to be a good mother, which was interesting. So That's what you need to know about Republican motherhood. But the concept of equality was also important during the Revolution, but slavery was still a prevalent issue in the colonies, and the country was not really ready yet to tackle it. A lot of people still refer to slavery as a peculiar institution, and obviously that is a very generous term. So it really sort of reflects where society was at during those times. But the revolution also saw beginnings in the abolition of slavery, with the first anti-slavery society founded by the Quakers in Philadelphia in 1775. So I saw a lot of people in the comments, I mean, in the chat say that oh, Quakers are the best. This is maybe one reason to support that. The revolution also resulted in a lot of religious debates and between the separation of church and state, with Thomas Jefferson passing the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom in 1786, which pretty much said that everyone should be free to worship however they like. And then on the global scale, the French Revolution was really similar to the American Revolution in its guiding principles of natural rights, equality, and representative government. On another note, the Haitian Revolution was inspired by both the American and French revolutions and led to the establishment of Haiti as the first Black-led country in the Western Hemisphere, with land redistribution and citizenship for all. Another important revolution or independence movement to note is the one led by Simon Bolivar in Latin America, and he advocated for independence in identifying Spanish Americans as a distinct group from Europeans. So after the American Revolution, the United States had to create a new government to replace the British colonial government. And so they tried to do this with the Articles of Confederation. And each state was asked to create its own state constitution, reflecting the new ideas of democracy. And the Articles of Confederation were written just before the Declaration of Independence, and they had established sort of a loose confederation of states but it was really weak as a central government. And the Articles of Confederation was ineffective in many ways, and we're going to go over that right now. So pretty much the Congress had no power to levy or collect taxes. They couldn't regulate foreign trade, enforce laws, or change or amend the powers of the government when problems arose. So pretty much they had no power and no money, so they were broke. And the government also had no executive branch. They didn't have a national court system, and there were a lot of fights among the states, and trading with other countries was really difficult. So the Articles of Confederation were sort of a huge mess. But they did do two things. One thing that they did was a land ordinance of 1785, which meant that the federal government could sell Western lands to pay off the national debt and organize these new lands into townships and public schools. You could argue it was a bad thing because it did encourage a lot of displacement of Native Americans, but at the time, America also wanted to expand a lot of the land, so that was something that they did at least. They also did the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which set a process for new states to join the United States of America, ensuring the country would continue to grow. So new states were added onto the existing 13 colonies. But because of those weaknesses, a rebellion occurred. And Shays' Rebellion was a series of armed protests that occurred in Massachusetts between 1786 and 1785. They were led by Daniel Shays, and he was a veteran of the Revolutionary War. Pretty much, they didn't want to pay their tax. They didn't the rebellion was sparked by economic grievances, particularly because of the heavy debt and high taxes faced by farmers and smallholders in the state. And that sort of exemplified all the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation because they didn't have a strong military to fight back on the rebellion, but also because of the heavy debt and the high taxes that they had to pay. Okay, on to the next slide. Okay, so at this point, the Articles of Confederation are a huge problem. And so we need a new system of government, right? And so politicians are trying to push for the Constitution, except there's way too many debates over the ratification. So currently at the time there were like two big plans and they were like really distinct. One was favored by large states and one was favored by small states. The one that was favored by large states was the Virginia plan. It had two houses of Congress and the representation was based on population and it advocated for a stronger national government. The New Jersey plan, however, only had one house of Congress and each state has equal representation. And it was really similar to the Articles of Confederation in that it would be more of a less centralized government. But both of these plans had plans to change the Articles of Confederation and they wanted Congress to regulate trade and collect taxes. So I guess they were tired of being broke. And both of them also argued for three branches of government. So that ultimately leads to a huge constitutional compromise. And so the New Jersey plan proposed a unicameral legislature with equal representation for each state and limited national government. And the Great Compromise combined elements of the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan to establish a bicameral legislature with different methods of representation in each house, resolving the disagreement over state power and helping to ratify the Constitution. Oh, by the way, we're on the next slide. I don't know. It's like,
I'm sorry, they wanted you to go back one slide.
oh, what slide?
This one right here. And just let them like talk about it a little bit more, slow down, and just like let them copy this down a little bit more.
Okay. So generally speaking, all you really need to know about the Articles of Confederation is that they had no power and no money. But obviously there are like very small details in that you probably need to know. That are written on the side, but pretty much they had no power to collect taxes, so which is why they didn't have any money, and they had no power to regulate foreign trade, which is also why they had no money. They had no power to enforce laws, and for changes to go through within the Articles of Confederation, it required majority approval from the states, and obviously no one's gonna like agree on everything together. So it was really hard to change things because there would always be like states that were like, no, I disagree with you. And the government had no executive branch, which was a huge problem because like if you don't have a president who's in charge, it's pretty much just like a bunch of states debating each other without like anyone to be like, hey, listen to me. And there was also no national court system. And because of that, it all led to Shays' Rebellion, which was pretty much a rebellion sparked by a bunch of farmers. And they were like really upset because they had to pay really high taxes because of the heavy debt from the Revolutionary War. And George Washington couldn't really respond to this because there was no unified like military. And so it really highlighted the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Other than that, you need to know the Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Pretty much the first one established that federal governments could sell Western lands to pay off national debt and organize new lands into townships and public schools. And the second one set a process for like new states to join the United States of America. So both of these combined let the United States expand. Okay, so back to constitutional compromise. So the constitutional compromise combined both the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan to create a bicameral legislature with different methods of representation in each house, resolving the disagreement over state power and helping to ratify the Constitution. So a bicameral legislature is like two houses within so you have the Congress and the Senate. The Congress is like elected based off of population, and the Senate is elected based off of like state. In the Great Compromise, there's also the 3/5 Compromise, which determined that enslaved people would count as like 3/5 of a free person for representation and taxation purposes to address concerns of both northern and southern states. And this was like a huge issue because people in the North were like, you don't let them vote, but you're still going to count them in your population. And the southern states were like, well, we should be able to have more votes because we have more people, even though those people didn't have freedom. And the Constitution also included a provision that prohibited Congress from ending the international slave trade until 1808, but the act of prohibiting importation of slaves effectively ended it in 1808. So pretty much they just sort of like set the problem off to a later time. And during that time, the Electoral College was also established to give smaller states some representation in the presidential election while allowing for more efficient elections. Okay, can we move on to the next one? Okay. So to go into effect, 9 out of 13 states need to ratify the US Constitution, and the ratification process occurred between 1787 and 1788. And the ratifiers were divided into 2 main groups, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So that should be easy to remember for your AP test. But pretty much the Federalists were in favor of ratification, so they wanted the Constitution to pass. They argued for stronger central government and more regulation over commerce and individual rights protections. These people were also typically higher class, they owned property, and the Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, were usually like largely rural farmers, and they were often opposed to like larger government because they thought it would threaten state sovereignty and individual liberties. They also pointed to the fact that the Constitution did not have a Bill of Rights. So they were like, we're not going to vote for this unless you have a Bill of Rights. And in the end, they included a Bill of Rights, which is why it went through. Okay, now on to important documents. Okay, so these are 2 important documents that you need to know. The Federalist Papers is not just one document, but more like a series. If you listen to Hamilton, you should know about this. But the Federalist Papers were written to promote the ratification of the US Constitution, and they were written by Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay. And as you may know, Hamilton wrote a good majority of them, and they were all published under the pseudonym Publius in various New York newspapers from 1787 to 88, so the time when ratification debates were occurring. And the papers explained like features of the Constitution, and they really persuaded New Yorkers to ratify it. And after that, Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution, and then it was Pennsylvania. Massachusetts only ratified the Constitution after a Bill of Rights was promised, like I mentioned earlier. And the Bill of Rights is another important document that you need to know. And it sort of lists all of a certain individual's rights and protections. So this would satisfy a lot of the anti-federalist concerns about potential infringement on civil rights. This included things like the freedom of speech, religion, protection against self-incrimination, the right to a fair trial, and a lot of other things. But we'll go over that later, so don't worry about it. The Constitution was eventually ratified by 9 states after Rhode Island ratified it in May of 1790. So now we're going to go over what's actually in the Constitution. It's definitely a lot, but you guys could do this. So in the beginning of the Constitution, there's a preamble and a Bill of Rights. So the preamble establishes that like we, the people, are the source of the Constitution's authority. And the Bill of Rights has everything that I mentioned before, including the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to protest, and yeah. And then the first article established the legislative branch of Congress, which pretty much has the power to collect taxes, regulate foreign and domestic trade. So think like money. And the second article established the executive branch. So that's the president, with powers like being the commander-in-chief of a military, veto power over laws, and appointments of judges for life. And the third article establishes the judicial branch of government, which are the federal courts. And so that's just like Supreme Court, lower courts, all those courts. You don't need to know like the specifics. You just need to know the first article, Congress, second article, President, third article, judicial branch. And then the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh articles establish the relationship between the federal government and the states, as well as the rights of citizens and protection against the government. And it's important to note that the Constitution is a lot easier to amend than the Articles of Confederation. It didn't require that all the states need to agree on everything. That would be a hot mess. And like I said before, the Bill of Rights guarantees the protections of citizens' rights, freedom of speech, religion, press, and other rights. And it was added after the main document.
People wanted to stay on the slide just for a little bit of notes, so I'm just gonna give it like a second.
Okay. Maybe I'll read the chat. How's everyone feeling about the exam? Okay, I'm reading it now. Publius. I think I pronounced it wrong, but it's okay.
The chat has been a journey, but you know,
It's hard to keep up while you're presenting, so I just sort of like
oh yeah, no, trust me.
don't see a lot.
It's hard to keep up while
if you guys are roasting me, I don't know. So I guess that's for the better.
They're not. They love you. It's okay. You all are getting a 5. Are we good on the slide though? Like
We're also sending out like replays and stuff. So
yeah, but see guys, you can go
out here.
Okay. I think we're good.
I saw someone say that they started studying today. That's
yeah,
so
one
fun.
person said
that's low-key what I did last year. So okay, should we move on to Hamilton's financial plan? Okay, so Alexander Hamilton proposed a financial plan which included paying off state debts, imposing high tariffs on imported goods, and creating a national bank. So pretty much a lot of it just said that like the U.S. government would take on the responsibility of paying the remaining state debts, and Hamilton really just wanted to strengthen the national bank in America and sort of have a better system for collecting money and managing taxes. And then that pretty much led to the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794, which was a challenge to his financial plan. And pretty much farmers in southwestern Pennsylvania protested harshly against the whiskey tax. They're like, give me my beer now. I don't want to pay tax. And after this, President Washington sent a militia to squash the uprising. And this also highlights a huge difference in the Articles of Confederation because he could actually send an army this time. So it showed that the nation was gaining a lot of its power. And you can sort of see on the comic, Jefferson doesn't want a big national bank, but Hamilton does. And that's pretty much the big picture that you need to see. And so now we're going to go on to Washington's presidency. George Washington is the first president of the United States, and he established a cabinet which included 2 really important dudes, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. The Bill of Rights was drafted during his time, so that was really important. And at this time, Britain and France were locked into another war, and there were a lot of differences in political views over foreign affairs that were accelerated because of this French Revolution. If you listen to the cabinet battles in Hamilton, you probably know way more details about it, but the only thing that you really need to know is that Jefferson wanted the US to intervene and Hamilton didn't, and in the end Washington agrees with Hamilton and he's like, yeah, we're too weak of a country right now to get involved in another war. So they pretty much stayed on the sideline and sort of just like watched from afar. And so George Washington issues the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793, and it's pretty much as the name sounds, they stayed neutral and they stayed out of the war. And at this time, there was also a large British presence along the northern border, which was a huge problem. And so George Washington tried to use diplomacy to solve it by sending John Jay to London in 1794. And this resulted in the highly controversial Jay's Treaty because Britain rejected the neutral rights and continued to search American vessels on the high seas. And then as Washington is like leaving the office, he gives a farewell address. And this is a quote from the farewell address. You could also listen to the song. But in case you need to like actually know details, pretty much all he says is that America should not get involved in foreign alliances. They're too weak. They shouldn't get like too caught up in political affairs and form like huge party divisions. And they also should like stay out of like huge political affairs. And he also warns against like serving like too many terms. So he sort of establishes that precedent that a president can only serve 2 terms. And right after that, John Adams nearly defeats Thomas Jefferson in the 1796 election. Can we move on to the... Okay. And he becomes the president, and Jefferson automatically becomes the vice president because of the Constitution. And so there's a conflict in France, which arises during Adams's presidency because of Jay's Treaty, which benefited Britain, as I said before. And France started seizing American merchant ships, which led to the XYZ affair, which is pretty much just that they like went on a bunch of American ships, and then it freaked a lot of people out. And then after that, the US negotiated with France, but that eventually failed. And so the Quasi-War broke out from 1798 to the 1800s. And during this time, it was pretty much just another war with France. And during this time, Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were meant to suppress political opposition and restrict free speech. And they were seen as a violation of the First Amendment. And they were a clear violation of the First Amendment. And because of like a lot of negative opposition, during the next election of 1800s, Jefferson won the election. And during that time, Jefferson and Madison also responded with the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which stated that states could nullify any legislation that they deemed necessary. And at this time, there were also 2 important parties. One is the Democratic Republican Party, which was led by Jefferson, and yeah. During that time, America also starts to like develop its like culture, I guess. So everything that is USA is developing during this time. So American identity was still largely based off of a lot of European culture. So things like religion, schools, arts, and technology were still sort of like based off of that. If you think about it, like you can still see that today. So demographics wise, there's a lot of population growth. The average age increases. There's more rural living. There's a lot of also major cities at the same time, and it is definitely more ethnically diverse than Europe at this time. And religiously speaking, 2 major churches develop. The 2 major churches were the Anglican Church and the Congregational Church. And Anglicans could mostly be found in the South and in parts of New York, and they were associated with England. There were other religious groups such as the Quakers, Baptists, Catholics, Jewish people, and Lutherans. So America at this time is very religiously diverse, but there are still two like major groups. And the Congregationalists were found mostly in New England, and they had their origins in Puritanism. And they believed that each church controlled its own affairs. They did not have to answer to like a higher authority. They were also involved in a lot of social reform, including the abolition of slavery. Arts and education wise, there's like not a lot of limited leisure time. It's like really time to grind and sort of like, establish a new country. So pretty much only rich people could have fun and like paint and read and be educated. So a lot of like rural farmers and poor people had low literacy rates. But at the time, there is one famous book. It was the second most popular book after the Bible, which is Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. And apparently it's really funny. I haven't read it. So technology-wise, there's also a lot of like new developments in transportation, manufacturing. There's the steam engine. There's flatboats, so that is good for like transportation. There's also a spinning jenny and a power loom, which sort of like expands the textile field. And there's also Eli Whitney's cotton gin, and that sort of separated cotton seeds from the fiber, which created a large demand for enslaved Black people in the South. And even though Whitney hoped that the invention would actually decrease the need for slaves, it actually did the opposite. And as plantations can now process much more cotton, these plantations wanted more enslaved Black people. And that's pretty much everything in the whole unit. We're going to take a short quiz, and then we're going to do an FRQ. But if you guys want to move the Q&A before the FRQ, we can also do that. Just like say what you want in the chat. But we're going to do the quiz first. Is everyone joining?
Yeah, hold on. I just have to switch over. It's not this, it's me. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like we hit our number that's gonna be here.
Okay, so the first question is, what was centered around the idea that reason is the primary source of authority and legitimacy, and advocated such ideals as liberty, process, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state? Okay, so this is the Enlightenment period. This is a period that I talked about earlier, which was like a movement of philosophy, and it sort of advocated for everything that you see in that question. Um, some important people to think about during this time are like John Locke, Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, that I told you guys about earlier, and like and they advocated for like natural rights and the social contract and the separation of power. Um, I saw someone put the Declaration of Independence. A lot of those thoughts were like in the Declaration of Independence, but this question is more asking about the like philosophy, I guess, of this time. And that sort of goes the same with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. All of these ideas are sort of like in these documents, but the most important thing to note in this question is that it's asking for like a larger movement rather than a specific document. Okay, this is the second question. How did the outcome of the French and Indian War affect relations between the British colonies and Native American tribes in North America? I saw someone wasn't in the quiz. I'm putting the link to join in the chat. You can't take this quiz on your own time because I think I have to start it, but we are sending out a review and a replay afterwards, so you can just like, I guess you can watch the quiz and like pause it before we show the answer. Oh no. Okay. A lot of you got it right, which is good. And don't be like worried if you got it wrong. This is just a practice and you're already here today. So it's showing that like, you know, at least you're taking the right steps to study. But pretty much the outcome of the French and Indian War caused a lot of Native American tribes to lose land and influence to the British. B is wrong because not all Native American tribes decided to ally with the French. Some allied with the American tribes as well, or like the British tribes. Benjamin F. Franklin attempted to organize the colonies to fight against the encroaching European and American Indian forces in the French and Indian War. What was the organization called? Yay! 86%, that's pretty good. I saw that some of you put the Continental Congress. The Continental Congress was after the Albany Plan of Union, and it wasn't established by Benjamin Franklin. So just know that Benjamin Franklin started the one that flopped, which was the Albany Plan of Union. The conflict known as the French and the Indian War was primarily fought between the British and French over fur trading lands located in the ... I saw someone say Benjamin Franklin did everything. He did everything except create a successful government. That was not out of pocket, it's true. Okay, 89%, that's pretty good. This is something I went over in the first slide, so I don't blame whoever said Eastern Canada. Maybe you just forgot. But yeah, pretty much the French and Indian War, it was all about the Ohio River Valley and that fur. The end of the French War led to, it should be the French and Indian War. I don't know why it's just French, but these quizzes are more just review for someone who asked that in the chat. You will see similar questions like this on your exam. But they are a good review, so. I saw Cody said this is too easy. That's good for you. Maybe you'll get a 5. Woo! Did everyone answer? Okay, so this is the Quartering Act. I saw someone in the chat say that you can remember this because rent costs a quarter. Not anymore, but maybe back then. So how did the Sons and Daughters of Liberty aid in the war effort? I see someone in the chat talking about like stimulus-based questions. We're going to be going over that in later nights. Yay, 90%, that's pretty good. I saw some other people say that they were the first organizers to petition in support of universal suffrage. That's not until much, much later. At the time, the United States still had a lot of problems regarding gender equity and racial equity. USA, USA, USA. Yeah, I want to know who Denial wants to tar. That's some serious tea.
No, for real. She really dropped that in there.
We're waiting on one person. Oh. Yeah. 87%, that's pretty good. The loyalists were actually loyal to the British, so just think of it that way. They didn't really want to tar and feather them. You know, they were like, yes, I love you. So it was a Sons of Liberty. Okay, so My screen is not loading. Hello.
Can
Okay,
you see it? Okay.
so this was the Boston Tea Party led to the Intolerable Acts because Britain was like really upset after all the colonists dumped a bunch of tea into the harbor. Just to go over again, the Intolerable Acts like closed the port of Boston until the colonists paid for the destroyed tea. The royal governor could pretty much ban town meetings, and a lot of British officials accused of crimes would stand for trial in Britain instead of Massachusetts. So, like, if you were a criminal, you would have to, like, hop on a ship and then sail all the way to Britain to be tried. And then it also passed a new quartering act that allowed British troops to be quartered in unoccupied colonial buildings and homes.
Emmy, are you ready to go right into the FRQ?
Right now?
Yeah, I think with time and everything, do you think you're ready to just go right into that? I think the chat is doing pretty good.
Yeah, if you guys want to go into the FRQ, let's go into it.
Can we see it?
My screen's still loading, but my Wi-Fi is so slow. So
Okay.
I feel like
Can the
I
chat see it?
see it.
Yes, you can. Thank you. You're gonna learn all about it. All right.
Okay, FRQ stands for free response questions. Today we'll be going over LEQs, which stands for long essay questions. And pretty much for this, you'll have 40 minutes. You can respond to a choice of 3 prompts. So if you don't like know 2, then don't fret. You probably will at least know 1. And then in your response, you should respond to the prompt with a defensible thesis. You should describe historical context and you should support your argument using specific examples. And then you should use reasoning, which is pretty much just arguing, and then make sure to use evidence. And then we'll go over like the more specifics of that in the later slides. So the prompt that we're going to be going over today is evaluate the extent to which, are you on the blue slide, by the way?
It lagged. We're good now? On the blue one?
Okay. Am I lagging?
No, I think my slides lagged, so it wasn't.
Oh, okay. So the prompt that we're going to go over today is evaluate the extent to which ideas of self-government influenced American colonial reaction to British imperial authority from the period of 1754 to 1776. So some important things to notice about this prompt are obviously what it's asking you to do, but also they include the dates that they want you to evaluate. So I'm like incredibly bad with dates, but if you can just remember like one thing from the date and sort of like base everything else around that, that's a pretty important skill. So the first thing that we're going to go over is the thesis point. And you get 1 point for like one thesis, which is literally just like one sentence. So this is a point that everyone should be able to get, at least if you're here tonight. So in your thesis, you want to write something that is historically defensible. So that means it can't be like a fact that is literally wrong. And it also needs to be like an actual opinion. You don't want it to be too broad, and you don't want to just like restate the prompt. Like, don't just say like, oh, ideas of self-government influence American colonial reaction. They want to say like evaluate the extent, which means like how much did it like do that. And the thesis is also something that sort of like sets up the rest of your LEQ. So you want it to include bits like things that you might specifically argue. Something that I wrote is, although these taxes Although these taxes are considered to be the reasoning behind the American Revolution, the impending war was more so about the need for individual freedom and Republican government than that.
I mean, are you speaking? Hold on. Momentary lapse, everyone. It's okay. We still cannot hear you, Emmy. Bro, Crowdcast is trolling. It's okay. We're on the thesis. But yeah, maybe your AirPods die. I think that's the overall consensus about this one. Yeah, maybe your AirPods died. Can't hear a thing. Someone read her mind. I'm trying for real. Oh no, I don't know then, Emmy. Okay. Bessie, do you want to join and join back in and I'll just cover this slide? You can do that. Or Daniela can take over the slide. Honestly, this is a record. First technical difficulty of the night, so. I know, Olivia, I'm scared. I'm trying to. All right. I mean, did you disconnect your mic and like reconnect? And I'm going to try to get through this slide for you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, we can. Great. We don't know each other, but great. Thank you.
Okay, I want to say my AirPod is not dead, so I don't know what that was, but that was interesting. Now that I'm not connected to my AirPods, you guys can probably hear my computer overheating, but it's okay. So I don't know when I cut out, but I'll just restate like the thesis that I came up with. So I said that although these taxes are considered to be the reasoning behind the American Revolution, the impending war was more so about the need for individual freedom and Republican government that the British deprived them after the end to salutary neglect. So something that I did in my thesis was that I set up 2 arguments that I'll be expanding on throughout my LEQ, and I also included and although this was considered it's more about this. So when you incorporate something like that, it also sets you up for maybe a counter argument that you can weave throughout your whole entire essay if you're thinking about earning a complexity point. But also, you probably don't need the complexity point to get a 5. You definitely don't because it's just 1 point. And I know that I probably did not get a complexity point. So, if you don't want to include a counter argument, that's so good. That's so valid. Next, we're going to go on to contextualization. Oh yeah, I'm back. Yay. The sun has set for me. Dark outside. Can we switch to contextualization slide? Okay, so what the contextualization point is 1 point, but it's still pretty important if you're trying to get a 5. So what you want to do is you want to describe the context of the time period that they literally give you. So they say American British imperial authority, and you want to explain that period from 1754 to 1776. So what you don't want is overgeneralized statements. Don't say oh, the colonies were on the East Coast. Yeah, that's for a pretty good majority of the whole entire period. You don't want to include irrelevant information, so don't say anything oh, the Vikings came to North America first. like that's pretty irrelevant and it doesn't really relate to like the ideas of self-government. And don't say anything that's wrong. That goes for like your whole entire LEQ, but it's really important for here specifically. So some things that I would talk about are maybe the Mayflower Compact and how that acknowledgement of the like first chartered colonies. I would talk about Enlightenment philosophy, so ideas about like liberty, consent to be governed, like individual rights. I would also talk about like salutary neglect maybe, and how that sort of ended. And then after that, the American colonials were like, no, we don't want to pay tax. But you can talk about a lot of things for your contextualization. It doesn't need to be super long. Maybe like a paragraph or like 2 to 3 sentences is usually pretty good. And you honestly, I don't know if you have to put it together in one paragraph. I think if you like contextualize it throughout your essay, you'll also get this point. So next on to the evidence. So you can get 2 points from this. So this is something that you really want to focus on. And to earn the first point, you must like identify specific historical examples. And then to get the second point, you need to like use that evidence to actually support your argument. So like that means that you need to like name drop and you need to like use that name to support your thesis. So this is our little interactive feature, but if you guys want to like drop some evidence that you would use in the chat, that would be good. Next slide. Next slide. Could you go to the next slide? Okay. Yeah. Woo. Okay. So I'll give you guys like 2 minutes maybe just to drop some things. In the meantime, I saw someone ask, how does my thesis answer the prompt? So my thesis was, although these taxes are considered to be the main reason behind the American Revolution, the impending war was more so about the need for individual freedom and Republican government that the British deprived them of after the end of salutary neglect. So the prompt is to evaluate the extent of like which ideas of self-government influence American colonial reaction to whatever. So evaluate the extent means like you want to see how much these ideas that I'm talking about, how much they actually caused the revolution and like the importance of them. And then the ideas that I talked about was like individual freedom and the need for Republican government and like the end of salutary neglect. And those are the ideas of like self-government that influence like the reaction that the American colonial like took to British authority. So I feel like a lot of you guys dropped some things that I could use in my LEQ. On the next slide, I'll just like show you a huge slide of everything that you could use. So as you can see, this is like a huge list. And that means because for your LEQ is pretty much open-ended, right? And this is going to be for every prompt, but there's always going to be so many things that you can cite. And you don't need to cite everything. Usually I would stick to like maybe 1 or 2. 1, if you can explain it really in depth, or 2, if you know more like general things that could help your argument. If you obviously know a lot, you can also try to connect these like pieces of evidence and be like, oh, this is related to this, like through this way. You don't need to know specific years, but it is better to cite things that specifically happened in the time period that like the prompt asks. Just going over some things, if I wrote about common sense, I would talk about how Thomas Paine's Common Sense talked a lot about like individual liberties, like the right to right of free speech, and like that is an idea that's really important in self-government, and it did influence the American reaction because they were like, we deserve these individual liberties. So that's how I would name drop and then like sort of use that to back up my point. And then there's the next 2 points are analysis and reasoning. Okay, so the first point is sort of like historical reasoning, and that's like how you use something to like frame or structure an argument. So an example of this would be explaining how particular ideas from the Enlightenment helped cause American resistance to British rule. You could use the Stamp Act protests, the Boston Tea Party, just as it's pretty much, again, sort of like the last one, you just need to explain your argument. There's nothing like that I can do to sort of like, I guess, give you like a clear-cut answer for how to explain something. This is something that you just sort of need to practice. If you're good at debate, then this part should be easy for you. But the next point is something that I can like sort of tell you exactly how to do it. The complexity point is like a really rare point. A lot of AP like testers don't get this point. I'm pretty sure I didn't get it. You don't really know if you get it or not. That's the thing. But to get the complexity point, you have to write an LEQ that is complex for the entire essay. So it's not just like one like paragraph that's like a counter argument. You can get this by explaining like causes of a lot of the ideas. You can explain similarities and differences between different ideas. So like if you explain the difference between the Albany Plan of Union or the Boston Tea Party, that would be one way to get it. If you explain how those ideas change over time, that would also be good. Again, you could write cause and effect. You can also connect it with like periods in like different time periods. So if you connected it to like the American Revolution or like a different revolution, that would also be good. If you explain multiple perspectives across themes, that would be good. One example of this would be like making a comparison with federalism in the 1780s or states' rights in like the 1850s. You could also get this by like examining the reasons why colonial resistance against the Navigation Acts before the 1760s was limited in comparison to the reaction after 1763. But I just want to reiterate that this point is like really hard to get. You definitely don't need it to get a 5, and honestly, it might be like a waste of time. Like if you focus on everything else, it might be easier to get all of those points rather than just like trying to get all those points and the complexity point. The complexity point is just 1 point. If you get the other points, you could still get a really high score on your LEQ. So these are some tips to keep in mind. You want to understand the prompt fully, so like read it over a few times. Like someone said, like, how does this answer your thesis? The prompt specifically says evaluate the extent, so you just want to sort of like write about how much like these ideas actually influence the American colonial reaction. So understanding the prompt is really important because that means you'll be able to write a good thesis and sort of like map out your argument really clearly. Also, when they give you the test, they give you like a sheet of paper with all the prompts on it. And then under all the prompts, there's like a blank space almost. On that blank space, you're gonna want to like outline your whole essay. You don't want to go into it blind, being like, oh, I'll just wing it. You sort of want to outline your thesis, like choose some pieces of evidence that you know specifically, and you know a lot of information about, so that you can get all those evidence points. You want to write them out. Maybe you want to create like little map pieces at the top, and then below those are like your two main arguments. And then inside those arguments, you want to like put your evidence that you would use to like support that argument almost. An outline just helps you stay like organized, which is also good for your readers. And it also does help you be less stressed. I feel like generally going into an essay blind is pretty stressful. Another thing you want to do is remember, you can't just like specifically state the evidence. You will get 1 point for like name dropping something, but you really need to analyze it to get all the other points. So you want to explain why this why Common Sense by Thomas Paine supports your thesis. And the most important one is that you should practice an LEQ before the test. I told you all about the LEQ. Now you know some things about it and how to write one well, but the best way to make sure that you get the best possible score is to actually practice one. If you practice one, you'll be able to see how you do under timed writing. You'll be able to see you'll also practice reiterating information from that time period. But the best thing to do is practice, practice, practice. I mean, people say practice makes perfect. They don't say that for no reason, right? And then now I'll do Q&A. If you guys have questions about anything that I presented, just make sure to put it in the Q&A chat though, so that way if I don't see it, other people will be able to see it. Oh no, my chat's not loading.
Someone asked, how would you, I don't know if you could see it now. Can you? Someone asked, how would you organize the body paragraphs in your LEQ? Like, what would be your 3 reasons personally?
Personally? Well, I guess I would write okay, I would write one paragraph sort of about the end of salutary neglect. Maybe for that, I would cite evidence about the Stamp Act Congress, which was sort of created in retaliation to the Stamp Act, sort of being like, we don't like this. And also I would cite that salutary neglect was really important because they wanted economic liberty as well. Then I would talk about maybe individual freedom. I would talk about the phrase no taxation without representation, and I would cite common sense. I feel like I keep saying that, but that is one document that pops up a lot, so you guys probably will know it by the time test rolls around. I would cite how that talks a lot about individual liberties and sort of connect that to the idea of individual freedom. And then if I was going for the complexity point, I guess I would also link it to maybe ideas of federalism and maybe talk about how the Constitution and the Bill of Rights has a lot of ideas of self-government in those documents.
Can you see the question on the stage? That's not what I meant to click. It moved.
Yes, there will be a test on the Great Gatsby.
That's my bad. I'm sorry. Can you see that?
Do we need to memorize the acts that the British placed on the colonies?
There we go.
It might be good, it might be helpful, but also a lot of the acts have exactly what they're about in the name. Like Stamp Act, what do you think that's about? Do you think that's about cars? No, it's about stamps. But yeah, going over them would be really helpful, especially if a LEQ or a DBQ about those pop up. But you don't need to memorize really specific things about them, maybe just general concepts that I went over today. I saw someone say if you can pick between 3 LEQ prompts, and yeah, you can pick between 3, so pick the one that you're most comfortable with. I'm scrolling in the chat. I'm looking for questions.
Someone asked if you can elaborate on the Navigation Act.
Yeah. If someone could like type a response out, that would also be good. I'm going to the slide right now. Okay, but pretty much the navigation acts were acts from the Parliament, and they were intended to promote like self-sufficiency of the British Empire, and they restricted a lot of colonial trade, um, and by decreasing the dependence on like foreign imported goods. So that meant that like North American colonies could only export like tobacco and sugar to England, and like not other areas in the world.
Another person said, can you please review the different ideas of the Enlightenment?
Can we go back to that slide maybe? I feel like that might be helpful.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of zooming, but
I'm going back to the slide right now. Okay, so
here we go.
okay, Thomas Paine argued for natural rights. So these are the rights that you're like born with. No one should be able to take them away from you, and pretty much every single person should have these rights. So like right to be happy, right to be free, things like that. The social contract was from Thomas Hobbes and Rousseau, and they argued that people form like governments to escape a state of war, and that the role of the government is to provide order and stability. And pretty much, it's also like in the name social contract. Like the government is a contract between the people and the like government, and they should be able to like, you know, provide for you and protect your rights. And then there's separation of power from Baron de Montesquieu. That is just like separate powers in government. Like there's national powers, federal powers, and then there's like state powers. And that also introduced the idea of like checks and balances. So we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and we have the judicial branch. All of these act to check each other and make sure that like none of these branches have way too much power. And then obviously Thomas Paine's common sense. We need to talk about that. But it pretty much, the document supported American independence and the idea of like natural rights and representation.
Someone's asking if you can touch on virtual representation. I'm gonna go to that slide for you. Right here.
Wait, sorry, did you say something? You like totally cut out.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Someone asked if you can talk about virtual representation. I put it on the slide.
So virtual representation is like the concept that elected members of your representative body like do not represent like a geographic region or location, but they represent the entire like country and empire. So this theory was like developed in Great Britain, and it expanded to the Americas. But pretty much it was like they used it in the context of the American Revolution as like Americans should be represented in Parliament the same way that thousands of like British subjects are represented. So like they don't have like American representatives in the British Parliament, right? Which is why they were like, this is a huge problem. I hope that helps. Someone said for the DBQ, do we only get one option? Yeah, you only get one because it's not like you're just like pulling things outside of your mind. But the benefit of a DBQ is sort of that like they give you documents. So like if you really don't know anything, read the documents and maybe you'll figure some things out. Someone said, weren't natural rights described by John Locke? Yeah, they were described by John Locke, but a lot of philosophers also sort of like built upon his ideology and expanded upon that. I feel like I'm like behind in the chat. I'm like reading things from like 5 minutes ago.
Very good. I feel like those are the ones we didn't get to answer, so we're like covering all the good ones.
Yeah, if you guys also have questions about if you still have questions from period 1 and 2, you can ask them now too, because this meeting is gonna end soon.
Someone said, can you go back to Jay's treaty and the XYZ affair?
Yeah, do you want to go back to that slide? So Jay's treaty was between the US and Great Britain, and it like settled like outstanding issues between the two countries that have been like left unresolved during the US Revolutionary War. And then the question also wants to go over the XYZ affair. So that was like an incident between the French and the United States diplomats at the time, and it resulted in the quasi-war affair. What you need to know about that is pretty much they had like I guess the British side had like a spy, and they were like spying on the American side, and obviously the Americans were like not happy about that.
We have what is the Mayflower Compact on the screen right now. That's kind of
so that was like sort of a set of rules for like self-governing, and it was established by English settlers who like traveled to the New World on the Mayflower. So that was like earlier periods, but it still sort of continues.
yeah, that's period 2. The Pilgrims were on the Mayflower.
Mhm.
It was their own laws for Mayflower Pilgrims, and it was basically how they wanted to govern themselves. It was pretty short though. It was like a really long, elaborate document. To the question on the slide right now, I mean, we can really go back to period 1. We talked about that like maybe 3 hours ago, but right here, this is kind of what you should be familiar with. I mean, memorizing them is a lot to ask, but I think you should be familiar with like the different areas, maybe 1 or 2 from each one, like the Southwest, Pueblos. The plains, there's a lot going on there. You should mainly know that they're nomadic. The Southeast, once again, there's a lot going on there, but you should be able to pick out a couple of them, especially like the Cherokees, the Seminoles, those really big ones, and how they were harvesting crops and planting crops. And in the Northeast, the Iroquois are probably the biggest one you're going to see there. So I would really recommend Pueblos, the Southeast, nomads in the plains, Cherokees and Seminoles, and how they harvested in the Southeast, and the Northeast, Iroquois. That would be my answer to that question.
For the test last year, they didn't ask about like specific tribes, but they did ask about like different regions So I just talked about like the different regions. I didn't know any of the specific tribes, but I don't know if that'll be the same for your guys' case, but knowing like general things is usually good for the test.
Yeah, like the SAQ I showed, we both said that was not the SAQ that we picked. You need to get really specific with that. But like
Oh, I
I
actually
said,
chose this one, but
oh, you did choose that one.
yeah.
You're bold, because I looked at it and said no.
No, because I think one was about like highways or something, and I was like, I'm not writing about this.
I suffered through that one because I looked at this. I was like, I'm not going to remember all of these. But if you are someone who can remember all of these, they might throw a question like that at you. It might be a multiple choice. I remember the multiple choice about Native Americans, mainly being about like the buffalo and understanding like the connection they had with the buffalo being very like sacred, how Americans were just killing the buffalo. That was the one question I really remember. But I don't really think it needed to be something this in depth unless it was like a SAQ.
I remember that like the tribes on like the western coast like did a lot of fishing, so I literally wrote about that. And then afterwards, my teacher was like, "Emmy, how'd the test go?" And I was like, "Yeah, I remember that they fish." And he was like, "Who?"
Mine was not confident. One said we're gonna talk about DBQs in like the next couple days. You should definitely be here for it. We're gonna talk about those keywords you might want to use, you might not want to use. So Dina, definitely come back. And oh, there's a lot of questions about the complexity point. I mean, if you really want to talk about that with the LEQ and like using outside information, maybe from different periods. So like, yeah, denial is really answering it. Yeah, I'd also agree. Try to stay within the period, unless you really are that.
If you stay outside the period, the only way that you'll like be able to use it to build your argument is if you like connect it conceptually, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a really good grasp on history, I'd say maybe, but I think it's the safest to stay within it.
Yeah, like you only have 40 minutes. I think focusing on the other points that are like easier to obtain, I guess, would be much easier than trying for that complexity point.
You know, mine. I
But
think
if you guys are like really focused on that, then we'll like add that to one of our skill reviews for a different night.
Yeah, do you want to go to the last slide just so we can go over what we're
Yep.
going to be talking about on the last few nights? And then
Okay.
we're going to wrap up for tonight.
So you run out of
There's a
time.
lot of information we covered, and we have a lot more to go. So tomorrow we'll cover periods 4 and 5, which is the first half of the 19th century, up through the Civil War and Reconstruction. On Tuesday, we'll be doing period 6 and 7. On Wednesday, periods 8 and 9. And on Thursday, we'll have a finale where we'll, go over everything again. And it'll follow the same format with new hosts talking about history and then different parts of the exam. So, thank you so much for spending your Sunday night with us. Hope this was a great kickoff for our week ahead. We can't wait to see you guys all tomorrow.
I want to say that if any of you guys decide to compete in that like TikTok competition, please don't make me look dumb, okay? Just like,
Bro, say you loved us.
yeah.
I agreed. Thank you. This has been great.